Hi, this is Seth Mosley, and this is the Made It in Music podcast, show 173.
Welcome to the podcast, where we bring you tools and resources to help you go full-time in music and to stay in. The music business is a roller coaster ride, changing faster than any of us can pay attention to.
We all need a competitive edge to stay ahead and to stay successful. What's working, what isn't, and what's coming. That's exactly what this show is all about. Back again with Full Circle Music, the Made It in Music podcast. What's up, my friends? Seth Mosley here. We're on the Made It in Music podcast today with my friend Ben Stouffer. This is going to be a great one. Lots to learn. But before we jump in, if you have questions about the music industry or need advice, I want to let you know about a free resource that you can access right now, and that is the Full Circle Music Learning Community. This is a group where you can ask music industry questions, share music industry news, and receive advice as you pursue your music career. This means you'll have an online community of over 2,000 people to learn and grow with. We also have experienced mentors in this group that'll be providing valuable content aimed at keeping you up to speed with music industry knowledge and news. So to join the Facebook group, head to fullcirclemusic.com/group. That's fullcirclemusic.com/group. All right, today we welcome music business strategist Ben Stouffer. Ben is the former CFO of data and analytics for Centricity Music Publishing and is now the creator of Counterpart Music, which provides independent musicians with record label and music publishing services. He has 2 decades of business experience in finance and accounting with a variety of companies, including a record label and music publishing company, a music business management firm, an S&P 500 company, and Big Four public accounting firms. He's also the creator of Sounds Good to Me, which is a music discovery podcast, which he produces and hosts. So glad to have Ben with us and excited to hear what wisdom he has to offer us today. How you doing, Ben?
Good, Seth. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being on the show today. I love it. Love getting to learn from you and work with you a little bit in the past few months, and
yeah,
even before. We can jump into how we got connected in the first place too, but
yeah.
Before we do that, I want to ask you, what first got you interested in the business side of the music industry?
Yeah. It's a good question. I guess just growing up, being a big music fan, I just enjoyed being around it, with whether it was my family playing records or my mom teaching piano lessons to my sister and me or to other people. Got into guitar at 15, one of those kind of things. And then, once I got an accounting degree out of college, and just kind of right away, I always felt like, hey, once I get some experience under me, the Big Four accounting and some other industry, I'd love to see if there's a way to make this work. I know I'm not going to be on the performance side. That's just not, I don't have that skill set, that talent, I should say, to be a professional musician. And so then probably, I guess it was 2008, I decided to take a little time, took a short little vacation from work and went to South by Southwest, the music festival down in Austin. It's a music festival and conference. And that was kind of how I got started learning, really, was I just went and sat in the conference panels all day. And after that, then I went to the shows at night and was exhausted, but then I came back every day. And then after that, I got a Billboard magazine subscription and bought the Don Passman book, All You Need to Know About the Music Business, which is kind of a pretty famous book. If your listeners haven't checked it out, that's definitely the one to start with. And so it kind of went from there. And then I ended up finding an opportunity with Centricity Music, which is how we met, to come down to Nashville in 2010 from Pennsylvania, where I was. Just kind of gotten into the business through that.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask about what you're doing today as a music strategist, but first, I love that you brought up the Donald Passman book, because that is one that we've given away. That's one we've recommended. After reading it and having been in the industry for as long as you have, are there things in it that you would disagree with, or do you feel like he's kind of hit the nail on the head with how it works?
Yeah, I think he's hit the nail on the head. I think one thing that makes that book so great, and first everyone should know there are a bunch of different revisions, he comes up, the first time I read it, it was like, hey, this iTunes thing seems like it might be important one day. We'll get back to that, So like, that's how old, that book has been. But I think he does a great job of keeping it light. And I think he's honest about things with like, hey, you know what? Here's about what you would expect for a royalty as a superstar artist. Here's what you might expect at a lower, but what the heck, things change, things are negotiable. Just understand that. And I think that's one of the things that, particularly when it comes to the record contract or publishing contract side, publishing contracts tend to be a little more straightforward than recording contracts. But for either one of those, or for a management agreement, anytime people ask me about my opinions on those things, it's always it depends. It's what's your negotiating power? What's your need? How much are you willing to give up in order to have a deal that gives you a additional benefit? So I think he's good at that. And I think that's one of the things that maybe just reading the book with that eye is important, to know that, hey, here's a rough idea, but when it comes down to it, things are different. And I'll be interested to see, we'll talk a little bit about what I do, but I'll be interested to see how much he gets into some of the DIY and sort of label services stuff in his next revision, if he does another one.
Yeah. So do you pick up the new revision every year?
I don't. I have the latest still. I mean, I have the latest. I'm not sure that when he's putting out a new one, but I kind of waited a while just because I got into the business. I was able to educate myself through a lot of different resources and just on the job that
you're learning,
that I didn't necessarily need the update. But yeah, I got copies for my staff people when I was working in finance at Centricity. I'd get them copies, so I'd get myself the new one, and just kind of go back through the areas that I figure probably changed the most since since last time.
So you're known as a music strategist.
Yeah.
What is a music strategist, and how does someone get into music business strategy?
Yeah, good question. So what I would say makes me a strategist is knowing how the revenues flow. So this is particularly on the recording side. When you're working with an artist to put a project out, the primary focus you're going to have is going to be on the record side versus the publishing side. That's a whole other discussion I'm sure you've had on different podcasts, and we can talk more about. But and so when it comes to the record side, it comes to having experience in knowing what the best practices are when it comes to how to properly schedule, meaning sort of your timeline, your mechanisms or your way for putting music out, how to schedule your releases, what content you want to provide that's in addition to a particular song or recording or a master, we call it, in addition to the cover art that comes with the digital release. The things that would come in addition to that are video content primarily, but other social content. So being able to look at best practices, like I said, and say, okay, what are other people doing that works well? What are the things that are dictated by a Spotify or an Apple or a YouTube that make it preferable for you to release content in certain ways at certain times? What is the kind of content, if it's talking about video or remixes, that you are able to release at a certain time, and who are the people you might be targeting with different content? There's some content you want to release that will keep your current fan base engaged. There's some you release, which, especially as you're growing, the bigger things like new recordings, you want to not only engage people who have engaged with you before, but also to try to get brand new fans. And that's where advertising, promotion, all of those things come with new content during a release schedule. So really what makes it strategy, I guess, is knowing what you need to do to differentiate yourself. This is kind of I have an MBA, a degree in business. So this is kind of the MBA version, is what differentiates you from other people when there's so much noise, so much any kind of media content out there. And that could even come down to, certain seasons where you shouldn't release music, or you should, based on what's going on in the world or what kind of music you're releasing.
Yeah, that's well said.
Thanks.
What, having been at Centricity, what was what all did your role entail there? Because I know when I met you, you were definitely on the finance side, but then you kind of moved into more of the data and analytics. What all did your role entail when you were working at Centricity?
Yeah, so I ran finance. I kind of started the internal finance department, accounting and finance, because we were using some outside help to do accounting before I got in. We started to grow a lot, actually, right about the same time they hired me. So I ran the accounting and finance world, which included a lot of royalties. The basic thing that I took from that I can apply today is really the understanding of where all the different money comes from, whether it's sound exchange, satellite radio, Pandora, how those things work, as well as all the other revenue sources. When I started there, they had almost no streaming income. It was all CD sales and downloads, particular downloads of albums for a while anyway. And then that, of course, completely shifted by the time I left in 2020. So that was where that part came from. And then I shifted to doing a couple of other things. One, I continued to oversee the finance department. We grew out the staff, and I took on a data analytics role, which was looking at what playlisting we're getting, using some tools that are out there that I can recommend to follow what playlists we're getting, how songs are doing, typically what kind of streams a track is getting week to week in, week out, what sources we're seeing. Oh, we saw a pickup in Pandora this week. What's that about? We should look to see if there's an opportunity there. That kind of thing. Also, a little to a lesser extent, looking at the social media campaigns or initiatives our digital marketing team was running, and helping out with trying to see how we could improve or what we could learn. And the other thing that I picked up that I apply a lot is that I was taking on the role of helping to manage what we called the production schedule, which was basically a look at when we wanted to put the different tracks or albums out for each of our artists, and what that meant in terms of content delivery, from A&R getting the masters from the production team to the creatives getting the cover art and social media skins and administrative, requesting mechanical licenses, all of that stuff, just sort of helping to manage that whole schedule. And that really helped to give me an idea of ways that an independent can also manage those things. So that's one of the things that I do for my artists.
Yeah. Were there any good tools that you used for managing that? Because I know it's one thing if you're one artist and you're kind of managing your own thing, or maybe you're a manager that has 2 or 3 people. But if you're a label that has, 10 or 12 artists, there are a finite amount of slots. And then when you move one slot, it affects other things.
Sure.
Every other deliverable. So how did you manage that? Were there any tools that were helpful for that?
Yeah, it can be a challenge. One of the reasons, honestly, that I was the person who did it was because I set up an Excel workbook, which may sound a little not exactly like the best way to do it, but like you did say, we had around a dozen artists or so at a time. And for a much larger label, that would not be probably the most suitable way to do it. But what we would do is the key was that we had both a schedule for like a work tab in Excel for each of those projects, each of the artists' EP releases, and so that one tab would include single releases, video releases, the next single, and then the EP, for example. And then we had a summary that put all of our releases across the company together. And so that if we said, artist A's single's going to have to bump at least a week for a certain reason, I could update the schedule. It would update the summary, and then we could see if there was going to be a conflict with other artists, whether it was on our creative people's time to be able to, create a video, or to do a cover art, or whether it was just, hey, where you have too many things going in the system at the same time to be able to connect with the digital service providers like Spotify is going to be heavy, things like that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a crude way to do it, but that was the way we did it. And honestly, it worked. Having a meeting we had a meeting every Monday. So having that meeting and then also making that document available by the cloud to everybody helped to manage that.
Yeah. And that's, it's a behind the scenes role, but it's more important than most people realize that, you're managing the schedules of those releases for Lauren Daigle and for Unspoken and for, Jason Gray and Jordan Feliz and so many artists. So it really does take a lot of organization.
It did. There's a lot of coordinating, the production meeting was theoretically only the people who needed to be there, but it was most of the company anyway, because so many people, needed to be aware of things. And so, it was good. I mean, a lot of, we had for the last year I was doing that, we had a person whose job was more on the coordinating. Okay, now we come out of that meeting. Now I'll coordinate with the managers or with other people kind of across, or to the extent that some decisions were made during the week, he would update me and we would, update that in the meeting on Monday. So it definitely takes an effort. When I got there, it was being done, but it was such a smaller scale because you weren't putting out so many singles. That's the thing, is so many releases necessitate a real focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So when it comes to strategy and execution of independent releases, what are some great ideas that you've discovered for digital marketing campaigns or just marketing in general?
Yeah. So marketing, I do want to say that sort of I've transitioned what we were just talking about with this production schedule over to sort of an indie release version. I tend to do it in PowerPoint just to make it look kind of more like a calendar going across the page. And that's where, starting with that, I think laying out your release strategy, which includes video, as I mentioned, whether it's a lyric video, official video, just a static audio art clip, is really important to first. It's really important to first set that up in an appropriate schedule to be able to get to marketing effectively. So what I would say, for example, is, if I've got an artist, we put a single out and we've got a video planned for a little bit later, they're kind of, maybe it's a little bit of a slow go on the audio side. We want to make sure we've got our plan in place to start marketing the video as a different outlet. More broadly speaking, what I've really been focused on from a marketing perspective are, you really need to be active on socials. I'm not really saying anything that I'm sure has been said on this podcast before. Anyone you read or talk to about, you need to be active on socials. If it's not something where you want to be, maybe you don't feel comfortable doing that. Maybe there's a reason particularly, maybe you just don't have the confidence. One, I would suggest, to be a musician, promoting yourself is really important. And so you need to find a way to share content, even if it's not about your music, to share some insight into your life is important for people. People don't follow you on Instagram to be peppered with ads about your next song. So you need to be able to do both, have a balance of both personal content in some way and music content. One thing that we do with one of my clients is I'll post stuff that's like, hey, check out the new single, or hey, have you seen the video yet? And we'll put like a team artist name on it. So it's like, hey, I'm not trying to get you to necessarily be in on this from a promotional standpoint. I'm more about sharing myself, but my team needs to make sure that my new single's out or whatever. That can be a thing that we do. So that's really important. And what I try to do for those who aren't super into it, or maybe just feel like they aren't very good at it, is to come up with 2 posts a week, which is really not enough. But if we can do 2 posts a week on Instagram and Facebook, then that's at least something that is hopefully more than what you were doing before we started working together. On the second side is the more vital from where I come in, because that part is really just advice that I've kind of just given on this podcast. And that's where the digital marketing paid promotion comes in. What I've really been working on and focusing on are the tools that Facebook/Instagram provide for Ads Manager. For those who don't know, you can run paid advertising on both Facebook and Instagram Stories and feed, and Facebook, all sorts of different places, but the feed and the stories being the main two. Also, I've been getting more into YouTube advertising when someone has a compelling official video. A couple of things, basically typically on Instagram and Facebook, what I've been focused on doing is trying to generate Spotify followers. And so what you do is you basically give someone, in my case, what I do is I run an Instagram stories ad. And I don't know if everybody else has in the last year or so, but I've just been getting peppered like every other Instagram stories post is an ad for me. That's probably because I follow a lot of musicians, but and that's basically like, it's just a compelling Instagram 15-second or less clip, hopefully, that gets people to swipe up, because as long as you pay for it, you don't have to have 10,000 followers for a swipe up link. That's the cutoff on Instagram. So if you pay for it, it gets them to swipe up and they go straight to your profile. Oh, that was kind of neat. Okay, I'll follow them and check out the latest song or the song they have as their artist pick, which makes the artist pick pretty important. That video, that ad should be video. I see way too many, quite honestly, that are just static pictures, and they're just not going to be as effective. If I don't know who you are, I'm not going to check out your music just because you've asked me to, but you didn't give me a 15-second clip. Have confidence that, the people who hear it that you're targeting will want to check it out. And then the second thing I mentioned was on YouTube. We've been running ads for a client or two of mine to drive YouTube subscribers. And that's when you basically put in what we're doing, at least right now, is you put a pre-roll, what's called a pre-roll ad on. If you've been on YouTube and you've been to a channel that has ads, you'll get the thing that you can sometimes click away after 5 seconds, or if they paid a lot more, you have to watch the whole 30-second clip or something like that. And that's what those are. So you can basically target keywords or different channels to get people to check out your video. And if they watch for 30 seconds or more, it actually counts as a view. Plus, you've got the ability to engage them to click through. And so far, for some of the ones I've been running, we've been seeing a lot of benefits of both the Spotify follower growth and the YouTube campaign.
So you've got Facebook and Instagram ads. You've got YouTube ads. Tell us a little bit about Spotify ads.
Yeah. And when we talk about Spotify ads, what I'm specifically talking about is those ones that you run on either Instagram or Facebook. There's a thing called Spotify Marquee, that where you can advertise directly on Spotify, so that people who use the ad supported thing will see, hey, check out my new song, or brands can advertise on there. That initially started out as very expensive. They've pared the pricing back, but I quite honestly have not seen a lot of success from the case studies I've read. So I don't recommend for most people to use Spotify Marquee at this point. But what we are talking about is basically what you do is you can target. I recommend starting, at least if you are on the kind of the lower end of Spotify followers, well under a couple of thousand, let's say, that you target the globe. So you just kind of do a worldwide ad. The United States is the most expensive ad market in the world. And so if you target the more expensive ones, you're going to get the ad shown to fewer people. And so I recommend targeting the world, start to grow that follower. Basically what you do in that ads universe is you target like interests for the most part. So if you want, and it's available to you, you could target people who shop at Whole Foods if you wanted, because you felt like that was your audience. That's going to be a pretty broad audience though. And so at the very least, if you targeted Whole Foods, I would say maybe make Whole Foods like they have to shop at Whole Foods, but I'm mostly targeting people who listen to music who would also like my music. So if you have an alternative guitar rock band, you're going to want to be targeting people who would listen to similar music and say, oh, I really like this clip. I want to check it out. But how did they know that I might want that? That you don't know that someone's targeting you. And I'm always thinking, sometimes I see some that don't feel like they apply to me. So I wonder what artist I follow they were targeting. But that's something to be honest about. Just be honest with yourself that not everybody should be targeting the superstar artists. Is also going to be less effective and more expensive to try to target superstars. But you can mix it up. So a lot of places, I'm going to give a little bit of a shout out to Tone Den, who has a person here, but they've got, I think they're based in California at this point, but they are a profile or a platform for helping to run Spotify follower growth ads and various other ads more effectively. And basically they help you to set things up a little more easily with geography and just kind of making sure things work a little more cleanly than it might in the Facebook ads manager. If you're starting on a lower budget.
No, and is Tone Den Spotify specific?
No, Tone Den, you can run ads for anything. You could run an ad for the independent mom and pop grocery store chain you own if you wanted to. They just have a specific setup right now that is very useful for Spotify following and YouTube subscribers. But you can use it for you can also use it for creating landing pages for people who have music landing pages or smart links. So you directly link, you can track a lot of analytics that way. I check them out. It's toneden.io. And the pricing varies. It's kind of a monthly fee to have a platform, to use the platform. But in any event, so what you want to do is target interests. Most of the time for us, it's going to be targeting artists who make sense in your genre, but you want to kind of run the gamut of higher level, higher activity artists to medium followings and people who are bigger than you, but not necessarily all the superstars, because everyone's going to try to target Ed Sheeran if they are an acoustic guitar guy, and so you want to try to find something a little different to make it easier. Those ad worlds, both YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, are what's called auction based. And so you are competing against other people in a bid to get space on my Instagram story with anyone else who's competing with those similar artists. So that's one thing that I help people do, is just kind of walk through, well, what artists make sense? Like sonically, let's work on it. Luckily, I do have a pretty good background in listening to music. You mentioned my podcast. And so I sit and work with the artist to say, well, who makes sense? Who makes the most sense to target? And then you can tweak things if they don't seem to work.
Sure. I love that. So for those indie artists on a budget, are there any other programs, tools, or resources that you would recommend for launching a release aside from, Facebook, YouTube, Tone Den?
Yeah. A couple of things. I mean, one, I think people are probably aware of the main digital distributors like DistroKid, CD Baby, TuneCore, Ditto Music is another one I use. You can check them out. Just check those out for more if you haven't gotten into releasing on your own yet. The main thing I would say, if you haven't released any music, make sure you get a YouTube channel. With a Google account. You don't even have to use a Gmail account. You can just sign up for a Google account with any email address, create a YouTube channel, put your name on it and your band name, your artist name. And the second thing, I guess, would be make sure you start collecting all your socials if you haven't released any music yet. So that's one thing I do. I've got some brand new artists, and one of the things is I came up with I sent them a checklist. Okay, got to let's first get an email address. Why don't we just get a Gmail address that uses the artist name? That way we can kind of access it as a team. Grab Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube channel. Grab an iCloud, a Pandora, because we're going to use those for analytics later. That's a lot of what I do, is kind of working through once we've got music out, or before we do, helping people get their Spotify account verified before you release music, or getting an Apple analytics after, things like that. I would recommend Chartmetric. There's a site, chartmetric.com, and that is so far, I think, the best use for streaming and social analytics that is either free or relatively inexpensive. In this case, they have a free version, and you can look up any artist because they're on the Spotify API, so they can pull information from the back end on anybody, not just you. And you can see a limited amount of information for artists on the free version. So you can see what Spotify playlists are in their database that you or someone else is on, which can be helpful if you're trying to look for similar artists. For example, for targeting, maybe you have a few artists, but you're like, I don't know who else I should target. You can go look at some playlists those couple of artists are on and find other artists on that playlist. Oh yeah, that feels like that could be my my sound. Let's target them. For me, I use the paid version mostly because I like to be able to track a lot of things that you don't get for free, but it still helps. It's still very helpful to be able to look at socials and streaming playlists in particular. Always going to promote the Spotify for artists, Apple for artists, Amazon Music for artists. A lot of people probably haven't gotten into yet, but that's important. YouTube Analytics and Pandora's AMP are kind of the big analytics ones I would recommend outside of that. Deezer also has one if you have a little more of a foreign following. Might be worth trying to get into.
I love it. So let's talk a little bit about, you were working at Centricity, you were developing the finance team, you had the data and analytics and the production schedule running. What inspired you to go off and start your own business? Yeah, good question. I was at Centricity for about 7 years. And in the probably last year or so that I was there, I started to meet by chance, by connection, a lot of different independent artists who had some of these questions that I've been answering on this podcast or that I'm kind of trying to answer with the services I provide. And I was helping some out just for free, like, hey, here's some strategic ideas to think about as you're releasing this album, or hey, let me help you get a look at Pandora so you can try to see if you can run an AMP feature. And as I started seeing over that last year or so, more and more of those cases, whether it was friends or people being introduced to me, I thought, there isn't, for a lot of these folks, isn't a place for them in the traditional label world for a couple reasons. One, they're starting out and they haven't gotten the awareness yet that it takes for a label to be able to invest the time and money. Two, a lot of people aren't interested in that. There can be, I think, mostly wrongly, negative views of the big bad record label. But a lot of people want to just be independent, retain ownership of their recordings, which is one of the big things. And also may just not be at that step where they need to give up either ownership of the recordings or a share of the royalties in exchange for a much bigger push. My business of Counterpart really is intended for an artist who I see as having a really great potential, isn't quite in the place where they've got the attention of even kind of like the mid-level labels, or they haven't quite built the fan base up enough to warrant it. And they are looking for some help. So, there's a real trend
The other part, I guess I would say, is there's been a trend that you can find anywhere in the news, music news, of the share of record revenue or streaming across the globe very much veering more toward people doing it independently. Now that would include people using things like AWOL, which is the Independent Artist Services company under Cobalt, where they will give you a pretty hefty investment in your career. You still own your masters. It's kind of what they would traditionally call label services deal. But at the same time, you are still in ownership of your masters. You're retaining most of your creative control, if not all. That's been a real trend. And so I kind of saw that coming a while ago too. And that's sort of the other reason that I felt like it was a need and a way that I could try to help.
I love it. So tell us a little bit more about Counterpart and kind of what you're doing day to day as a company. You've touched a little bit about it, but for people that may be interested in researching more or connecting with you, what is it that you do every day to work and help develop those new artists?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I do have, I think, three artists on the roster who had not put out any music before I started working with them. And so those I tend to spend a little bit of time up front doing all that. Let's check the boxes on getting all your socials and things set up. I give them a checklist of, okay, here's what we need from a creative perspective. We need a YouTube banner. We need a profile pic, but we also want to have some interesting content imagery for launching you on your socials and getting people aware. And then for them and for anyone else who's already had some music out, the primary things that I do are I create a release grid. Kind of the first thing that I do when I get into an artist, and it really is a project by project basis, so it depends on where I am in an artist's project cycle as far as what I do in a certain week. But I do what I call digital audit, where I go through and say, okay, so you're an artist who's already been set up. You've got some socials. I'm going to give you some thoughts on some things we could improve or things that seem to be working well that are some strengths we should take an opportunity to use for the release we're going to work on. You really want to both fix anything that might be a weakness and also utilize what you already have as an asset. You don't want to just look at fixing the problem, so to speak. And then once I've done the audit, we kind of get together and we'll adjust some things, but also keep that in mind for setting up the release plan. And then that's the next thing I do, as I set up this PowerPoint release plan, to the extent that people need some help in terms of, okay, well, I know that's when we want to put it out, but when do you want me to turn all this stuff in? I can kind of give them a turn in due date schedule too.
Man, that's so huge. Like, that's huge for artists. Is half the time, artists just don't know how long of a runway they need to properly market and set a record up for success. And most of the time they give themselves way too little time.
Yes.
Because it takes time to get your music pitched and all of that stuff.
It does. And that's probably good. This is probably a good time to talk about that. There's so many answers to this question that I'll give you my view. And it's one that's relatively consistent. Like I've seen others kind of take the same approach. I like to have a single or whatever the release is in-house to be put up through, let's say, a DistroKid or a Ditto Music 5 weeks, if not 6, before the street date, the release date. One that does give us a chance if we realize something was screwed up. Every once in a while I've had someone, not on my clients, but people who like, hey, that wasn't the final mix. Oops. Things like that. And that gives you a little bit of time just to try to breathe and get that set up. But you also want to make sure that you've had time to get things put through the system. Spotify often will turn things around in a day, but you want to make sure that gives you the opportunity. Apple Music, for example, if you wanted to try to pitch to an editor, that's not always going to be the case. But if you wanted to, they really need to have the music in their system, like in the editor's hands 3 weeks, if not more, before. So you're already talking about cutting it close, even at 4 weeks, and 5. Honestly, the other part of that is, so I'm a 5 to 6 week guy, but I'll work with other things. The other thing I guess I would say is it also gives you the time to set up a schedule for messaging your audience, particularly if, let's say, it's the first single from a new project. You want to be able to have a time where you switch out your socials, and that's the day maybe that you tell everybody you've got a new project coming and it's going to be out on whatever day. And then throughout the next maybe week and a half or 2 weeks, you have a pre-save link that you can share with them, and you message them with, let's say, clips, let's say the single cover, and then you have a little clip of the chorus and a clip of a verse and a clip of the bridge, and trying to get their attention. Because even your best friends won't pre-save it the first time they see it. Sometimes, a lot of people won't pre-save at all, but you want to at least try to get the message out so that they don't have to be sitting there on the day you released it to find out that it was coming. If I see it a couple weeks ahead, I might be, oh, okay, I'll have to remember that. And then when it comes, it's maybe I've pre-saved it, or at least now I'm looking, oh yeah, okay, I remember so-and-so telling me about that coming out. That pre-release, doesn't really need to be more than 2 weeks, or that pre-messaging, but that's where getting it in 5 or 6 weeks helps you to set that up. The other thing is that I like to start running Spotify follower growth ads on the day of the release. And so I want to have some sort of a clip, hopefully a visual with the artist in it, lip syncing or something. But if not, I want to at least have the artwork and a piece of the single clipped, synced to the clip as a clip. And so that requires having everything, before. So.
Yeah. Well, that's some great nuggets right there for people who are listening. Oh. You have a presentation that you give to artists called The Business of Music, which is all about revenue streams for both recording and publishing copyrights. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I actually started doing that at Centricity when we would have these, every other year we'd have these retreats for independent artists that we were interested in maybe working with in the future. And when I came on, they said, hey, you know what, probably could be good to have one for business. So I basically set something up and ran it with my staff that basically walked everybody through as much as we could in an hour, walked people through the primary ways that the money flows for records and songwriting copyrights. Really starting with hey, make sure you know that there's a sound recording copyright and a song writing, we'll say, songwriting or publishing copyright. And then we kind of diverge from there. And so it goes through in a lot of detail, but I try to make sure that I just give the overview and let people have a chance for questions. But I also did this, gave this a little bit last year to some folks who were interested in learning about it. And every time I've done it, it's had to be updated, within the 2 years because something changed. And so it really follows the flow of how, okay, I don't really understand what sound exchange. Isn't that like a PRO? Okay, what's a PRO? Like people can kind of get an understanding of the basics of what all of the different places songwriting money flows through, how record royalties flow. And then of course you've got both of them coming from, let's say an Apple Music has to pay both. Well, they don't pay them to the same place. They pay them in different ways. So that kind of split, people understanding. And I'll be honest, there are a lot of professionals in the business who still don't entirely understand how songwriting streaming royalties work, for example. And so that just gives a little bit of a basic understanding. Probably the best thing that comes out of that usually is people say, oh, I should sign up for that. Or, oh yeah, I better go back and look at that. I think I signed up for that, but I probably didn't submit my works,
Yeah. Well, man, can you give us just a few of those biggest nuggets of like, what are those things that people aren't signed up for that they should be signed up for?
Sure. Well, the first is Sound Exchange, and I would just search for register Sound Exchange, one word. And what that is I kind of call it a quasi-governmental entity that is responsible for collecting the master performance royalties for digital streams. Now, what that means is that is for what you would call non-interactive or your radio type. And so that is from a bulk of it, it's going to be your Pandora and your Sirius XM, because those two places have radio type services where I don't choose exactly what I listen to. I have a station, and they pay those to Sound Exchange for people who don't have direct deals, which is most people. And then anytime, like if your song were played on a terrestrial or a commercial FM radio station, but then they also have an online station, they would pay royalties or should pay royalties on those streams from online. In the United States, you don't get recording royalties from commercial FM AM radio play, but on the digital side, you do. The second would be if you don't have a PRO yet, but you're a songwriter and you're getting a decent batch of songs, especially if you're going to be releasing them soon or have already released, sign up for ASCAP or BMI. Those are the performance rights organizations that will accept anybody. There are some others that are more of an invite only and they're for profit. PROs, ASCAP and BMI are the PROs who are essentially not for profit and take anybody. There's a fee, so I don't necessarily say everybody should go do it right away. But if you've got a batch of songs that you're going to be commercially exploiting, as they say, i.e. they'll be earning money in some way, I would go ahead and spend the $100 or $150 to sign up as both a songwriter and a publisher, because you are your own publisher if you don't have a signed agreement with another one. The third thing that is the new one that I had to add to the presentation this year is the Mechanical Licensing Collective, which we know a lot about here in Nashville because they're based here now. And they are a new group who was under the some of the copyright reform of a couple years ago, was formed to license and collect mechanical royalties for the digital services providers. So previously, it was a little bit haphazard. Most of it was being done by Harry Fox Agency on the licensing side, but you had to be a publisher to sign up with Harry Fox. Now, any songwriter or publisher should sign up with the MLC. Just search for the Mechanical Licensing Collective. And they started actually collecting processing effective January 1st of this year, 2021. And so now is the time to start signing up, because what they will be doing is basically collecting and paying to you, as long as you've given them your catalog, the songwriting copyrights that you have on anything that has streamed on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Amazon, Deezer, those sorts of things. And the other thing I would say about that is they will also be paying back royalties, because what was happening was these people who couldn't sign up with Harry Fox because they weren't a publisher didn't get paid any of these royalties. Most people probably are hearing this right now and not realizing that these royalties are out there, just based on my survey of people. And so there are back royalties sitting at Harry Fox that they are going to be paying to the MLC, so that the MLC will then pay out to people who weren't registered with Harry Fox yet, or if the song wasn't matched for some reason to someone who was. Yeah. And so if you have written your own songs or you've written songs for others and they've generated streaming royalties from the majors, from Spotify, YouTube, et cetera, you very likely have not been paid if you don't have a publisher. But they will be going here and starting to do payment of those unpaid but collected royalties. And there are people, if you put music out for a number of years, you may have at least a decent check. Signing up for the MLC is free, so you don't have to pay anything. What you need to do is sign up, and then you or someone who works with you needs to submit your catalog, which is very similar to the process of submitting your works to an ASCAP or a BMI. They've made it as simple as they can. A lot of good webinars and things they've been doing at the MLC. Those folks are on top of it all. So those are kind of the sign up places.
Sure. I love that. And people can find out the info about the MLC at themlc.com.
Yep.
Thank you for making sure people are aware of that.
Sure.
And you hit on something that I was going to ask it a little later, but it kind of makes sense to ask it now. But are there times when giving up publishing as a songwriter is a good idea? Like, if so, when would you recommend giving up publishing and actually signing with a music publisher?
Absolutely. And one of probably the second slide in my indie presentation is that publishing royalties are publishing ownership is automatically split half between a writer and half to the publisher. So if you sign a full publishing deal with someone, you're still keeping half of the money. You're keeping the writer half. Now there's, depending on what kind of money you have advanced on royalties and stuff, you may not get a payment for a while, but you're getting that advance in exchange. So that's the first thing I always like to say is you're not actually even giving up the whole thing unless you would sell some big catalog and you sell your writer's share at the end, like we've seen in some of the transactions lately. So that's important. So basically the question is, well, should I be giving up half of what I have in exchange for something? And when should I do that? And if I'm an analytic guy, I'm a math guy. So you could say, well, if you could double what you have now, then giving up half of it would put you right back at square one, basically. So you would want someone to at least double it. And when you're talking about going from an independent songwriter to being a signed songwriter, doubling it isn't even the question. It's about many multiples of times of growing what you have. Because you can imagine.
And most of the time, you can't double zero.
Right. Yeah.
They're starting out.
Hey, my PR check was $1.30 last year or something. It's like,
yeah.
Okay, that's basically zero, right?
Yeah.
And so, my real basic recommendation there is that if you have a good music business attorney explaining to you the offer that's on the offers or offer that's available, they will help you to best make sure that you have a deal that is good for you. I have a client who I helped to get a co-publishing deal. I set her up with an attorney. There was some hesitancy, mostly just because of not understanding what a publisher does when you haven't worked with one. But what we ultimately did was, this was a situation where the opportunity for being put in co-writes with people you weren't going to get in a room with on your own, the opportunity for film and TV sync licensing that you would never get. They say, hey, let's bring you in for a day to write for this song, or maybe we just put your voice on it and you write a couple of lines. You would never have that without someone giving you a shot. Just the, pitching to artists has become less of a thing outside of, for the most part, country these days, but there is always opportunity, particularly on pop, for you to, get a song that someone else decides to cut. And there's just a lot of opportunity for them to grow what's basically zero into something that can be very fruitful. And a lot of that is those connections that you get, a network of people who now know that, oh, okay, you are on this publisher's roster. Now I can take you seriously and help you out. And, my best recommendation besides the attorney thing is, if it doesn't feel right to you, make sure you ask the right questions about, okay, so what is this I'm getting in return? I guess to get into the weeds, the other thing is, I mentioned my one client has a co-publishing deal. So off the bat, she actually retained some of the publishing share anyway. That's not going to be common. That was just the particulars of this deal. And the other thing related to that would be many deals will at least negotiate that if you get to a very high level of earnings, it doesn't have to be the number's not necessarily crazy, but it well exceeds where you are now, that you will actually have a chance to earn some co-publishing going forward if you were going to sign, let's say, another option with that publisher. So, that initial deal gives you a lot of benefit to be able to get all of those values, the value I just kind of laid out there. And then if you've got a little bit of wiggle room, you can negotiate something else down the road.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And I do want to hit on something, because I know people have probably gone online or read different books, and you hear about this whole stigma attached to keep all your publishing, don't give away your publishing. Or, for that matter, what you just talked about, co-pub deals.
Yeah.
I've heard so many artists who are literally just at square one, who come in and say, man, I'm not going to do it unless I get a co-pub deal, which means not giving up that whole full 100% of the publishing side. And really that's something you earn. That's something you earn the right to have over time, whether through, well, it's always through success of your songs. So just to say that again, if you're an artist and writer who's starting out at the very beginning, unless you have multiple publishers and labels bidding against each other to get you, which likely is not the case in 99% of all cases, then you're going to get a standard 100% publishing deal. And really, I talk about this a lot. I just talked about it in a video that I just posted on why would you give that away? And well, from a publishing standpoint, you have to look at it from their shoes of like, why would they want to give you a slot that they could give to another writer? The slots are very finite, and the time of day and them sharing their relationships with you, they know it's going to take years, largely years, if you don't have existing catalog to make anything at all on it.
Yep.
And so it really comes down to risk.
Yeah,
just like a bank loaning money, the interest rate that you will repay them is directly proportional to the risk that they perceive they have.
That's absolutely right. I mean, it's the slot of, hey, we only have enough manpower to manage so many writers, and almost invariably they're going to have some advance that they're going to give you. So they're actually giving you cash, either over time, like a monthly payment, or upfront, that they are actually taking out of their company pocket to give to you as an advance on future royalties. And so they need to see that. I should say the client I mentioned who got a co-pub, that kind of speaks to what I was talking about with the Passman book, where not all deals are created equal. And so there was a bit of a risk share that, hey, in exchange for co-pub, there was some other parameters of this deal that were more favorable, to the publisher. So we kind of that's where the negotiation stuff comes in. But yeah, I think that's really important. And I'd rather have, half of a big number than all of zero, as you said.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just thinking bigger. As we're kind of wrapping up, I've got a few more questions, and this is something that we talk about a lot. And I know that you share this perspective as well. It's important for artists to also learn to think like entrepreneurs. So what are some ways an artist can do that?
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you said that. The first thing I think is, when I think of an entrepreneur, the very first thing I think is someone who is very self-motivated and recognizes that, like with me, with Counterpart, with you, with Full Circle, and many of your endeavors, you realize that it's not going to happen without you. You don't go into an office and punch the clock and everything. If you didn't show up one day, it would be fine, or they would replace you. This is your baby. And so first of all, to think like an entrepreneur, be self-motivated, realizing that, hey, you know what? You need help from people like us to advance your career, but it's got to start with you. Whether it's like I talked about with being active in social posting, you may not like it. Let's come up with a way that you can do it that makes sense. Whether it is putting in the extra effort to get that chorus just right. Maybe it didn't pop quite right when you listen to it a few times. Go back and get that right from either a songwriting or production standpoint, if your producer's flexible. The other thing that is important for my clients as well is, for better or worse, you need to have a monetary investment in yourself as well as an independent musician. It unfortunately is not the case that being an independent musician, is a job where someone just pays you to do it until you've reached a certain level. There isn't an oh, well, this is entry level and we'll pay you $10 an hour. You've got to be doing this yourself, but you've also, in order to get some awareness, you've either got to invest some money in yourself, or you've got to have a benefactor who is investing in you. That's something that now I didn't start that way, but now I require all my clients to have some minimum budget for marketing, because I know that we can get the single out and it'll just, it won't go anywhere if we don't have any way to release it to people beyond the normal audience.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure.
I know it varies with everybody, but what is a minimum budget nowadays, in your opinion?
This is just for me. Like if you, this is not the answer to what does it take to break an artist. This is what does it take to take a release and have successful growth that enables you to move to the next step. Because the break an artist is a much bigger number. And the number that I've been sticking with for a release is to have a $2,000 digital marketing budget. And I should also mention my work is mostly fixed fee based. I charge a commission basically on ads that I run, but for all of the setup and things I do is fixed fee. So that's a kind of separate negotiated thing. But I recommend 2,000 because that gets you basically a year's worth of promotion at $5 a day and then some. So that gives us the ability to run Spotify or YouTube ads at $5 a day. And then if something starts popping, we add a little more to it. Or if we have some $200 opportunity that comes up for some other kind of ad, or, you know, a banner ad on a site or something like that, a blog is willing to do. That gives us a little bit of cushion. You know, that 2,000 guarantees nothing. I will tell you, I have a vast difference in success in terms of Spotify follower growth from one to the next one on a per penny or a cost per click, cost per follower basis. And that's really some of that, you know, just is the audience. Some of that just depends on, you know, whatever other things come into the creative world. But that's kind of where I start. Is 2,000 gives you a nice budget to be able to do all those things. That does not include, by the way, the costs for having someone make a video for you, or for someone to generate a logo or reskin your website. I guess we could probably take that out of the website part out of the budget, but visuals, and that's just digital marketing, paying ads, 2,000. So just, you know, it just depends on what you can get. Some people, I've got a friend who will do that and they'll charge me a little bit. Okay, great. You got the photos for relatively cheap. That's awesome. Maybe you need to put some more money into videos. For the most part, I will advise people on like what I think makes sense. But for the most part, I let people handle their budgets for, hey, if we're going to do videos, that's kind of your budget and whoever you want to work with. I'm happy to help connect you with people. Let's understand what your budget for that is. But for digital, it's 2,000. So.
Gotcha. Very, very, very cool.
Yeah.
As we're kind of heading into the lightning round, which hope you're ready for that. Got some good questions for you.
I'll try to be briefer.
A few more questions.
Yeah.
What are some books or resources you recommend to start getting more knowledge of the music business? I know you talked about Donald Passman already.
Yeah,
are there any others?
The Passman book is the one I recommend. It's funny you ask that now because there's one that I just bought but haven't cracked yet called Fanocracy. Democracy of fandom, democratization of fandom. I'm curious about it, but I haven't started it, so I shouldn't probably recommend that yet. There's a book. Let me get the name of this right off of my.
Yeah, and it could be any resource in general. Could be a podcast or a course.
Sure. There's a book I'm going to recommend that I liked called "Come Together: The Business Wisdom of the Beatles." I'm a huge Beatles fan. My dad, I think, got me that as a present one year because I was in the music business and a Beatles guy. It's got some just interesting things. Things were very different back then, but some interesting insights. What I recommend from an online perspective, I use Hypebot and Music Business Worldwide as basically my music business RSS feeds. So I use Feedly to manage subscriptions to blogs, and those are both Hypebot.com and Music Business Worldwide, which is out of the UK, are basically aggregators of. They do have their own, unique content, but they're basically aggregators of the daily stories you need. And even if you don't have a chance to catch up during the week, at the end of the week, I think Hypebot at least has here's the rewind of the big stories you missed for the week. And so you can do that. Those are probably the two I would recommend. Seth Godin is great from an entrepreneurship standpoint. And just as a thinker, I think he's great. And I love Malcolm Gladwell just as a thinker. Blink would probably be a book of his I would recommend. That is a good one. But all of Gladwell's stuff is good for our business.
Completely agreed.
Yeah.
So if artists want to connect and potentially work with you, how can they get involved? How can they contact you?
Yeah, sure. Probably the best place to get info is counterpartmusic.com. I'm also on Instagram at counterpartmusic. You can DM me there if you want. And then I think Facebook is Counterpart MSC. But you can just search for Counterpart Music. It's got this sort of looks like a treble clef, but it's a C and a P sort of logo thing my clever designer came up with. And so my email address is there, probably a good place. And then on Instagram, there's a link tree in my bio that has a bunch of resources.
Love it. All right. You ready for the lightning round?
I am.
All right. Here we go. Number 1. What is the best gift you've ever received?
Best gift ever, I guess I'm going to say has to be the old school Nintendo. Just because I played that so much when I was a kid. I just played so much as an 80s and 90s kid.
I love it. Number 2, what item is always in your fridge?
Sadly, always in my fridge is probably only water. I mix it up so much that with food, I mix my food up so much that water's probably the only thing
that's consistent. Hey, that's a healthy
the Brita,
Yeah. Number 3, what was your first concert?
I always say that it was Gloria Estefan and Miami Sound Machine, which I believe is true. It's possible I went to one as a little kid and didn't remember it. But that was actually right before she was in a pretty serious bus accident. 2 weeks later, she had one that sort of changed her life. And But Gloria Estefan and Miami Sound Machine, conga, and all that stuff.
That's a good start. Number 4, what's your favorite movie?
Pulp Fiction.
All right.
I watch that all the time.
Yeah, it's classic.
Yep.
Number 5, and the final question, what was your first album you bought and why did you buy it?
Yeah. So first album I guess I bought for myself with my own money was Duran Duran's Decade on CD. When I was a kid, it was my parents would get me, we had vinyl, Thriller, George Michael Faith. There were so many albums that my parents had. The reason I bought that one was actually because I was on an 8th grade trip, science trip, and we stopped in Key Largo. We stopped on the way back to the Miami airport at some place, and for some reason, we went to a place that had a music CD store or music section. And I remember I was all pumped because I was like, oh, I'm going to buy this. But they had also mislabeled it. So for whatever reason, there was another copy of that CD that was $2 more or something. And they had mislabeled it. I was like, oh, I can even save a couple bucks. So, and I love Duran Duran. I love that music. That was huge when I was a kid. And I guess I bought that when I was 13 or 14 for myself.
Well, you did great. You aced the lightning round.
Thanks.
We're going to be doing a deep dive on what it was like leaving Centricity to start your own business. We talked a little bit about that. I know there are a lot of people out there with entrepreneurial ideas and aspirations. So if you're interested in watching the deep dive, go to madeitinmusic.com and you can find all of the deep dives there. Ben, thank you so much for being on the Made It Music podcast today. I know I've certainly learned a lot. I know the listeners will have learned a lot as well.
Well, thanks, Seth. It was a pleasure to be on and always great to have you.